and does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because a hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father. Thank you for illustrating the hired hand point of view that usually gets left out. Jesus points out, I am the good shepherd, not a bad shepherd. Here's the example of the bad shepherd. And we usually skip that part. And we shouldn't. Because what John is telling us in his gospel early on in Jesus' ministry is where Jesus is headed. And Jesus says this, especially in the Gospel of John, over and over and over again. The kind of work he is here to do. He uses a lot of word pictures, a lot of metaphors, a lot of similes sometimes. He uses, I am a shepherd. I am a vine. I am the door. All these kinds of images that people know about. And many of them translate directly today, but as you can tell from the children's sermon, some of this needs a little work for us. So what does it mean for Jesus to be our good shepherd? As I said during the children's time, he knows every one of us. He is not in the wholesale sheep business. He knows, even in the largest church, even in no church at all, in the largest city, he knows every person and wants a relationship of love and sacrifice that measures itself against his with every person. He wants to be our shepherd. He does not want to be our dictator. He does not want to be our teacher only. He wants to be our shepherd. And like the shepherds of old, he wants to know us by name. He wants to know every hurt we have. And he wants to take care of us and gather us in. A couple brief examples about ancient shepherding is, first of all, you carry oil. You carry vinegar. You might have a few claws that you use, and you tend the sore feet of the sheep. Now, how many of you have ever tried to catch a goat on Kauai? Or have you looked, as my granddaughter at age 6 did, from the top of the peak, looking down into the valley and said, I'm not going there. And you looked up and went, that goat's way too high. We're not going to worry about it. There's a guy in town who offers to sell goat and pig meat now, I hear. And I'm not sure if I want to invest in 20 pounds of goat once it's dressed. But the shepherd would go up after the sheep. Because after all, the shepherd's accountable for each sheep. David was a shepherd. Why was David a shepherd? Because he was a 7th out of 7. He was the youngest and the scrawniest, and he got the job. Only because Samuel said, don't you have a few more sons I can look at? Did David even get called out of the field from being a shepherd to become the king of Israel? So it is that shepherds have to know their flock. So it is that ministers need to know who they serve. And the other part of it we need to remember is this. As my old mentor used to say, remember, you are the shepherd of the flock, you are not the head ram. Do not butt heads with people. Do not chase around after other people's ewes. Do not consider yourself as just one among many, but consider yourself as responsible as a shepherd for what's going on with your flock. The other flip side of this is Jesus says, I have other flocks. Well, wait a minute. We studied hard. We listened to our missionaries. We did all the stuff right, and we know that we've done the right thing. How come there's somebody else? Well, in John's gospel, this may well refer to the division between Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians, but it's also just about division in general. Paul, earlier than John, writes about how Jesus in the cross breaks down the partition wall between Jew and Gentile. Why? Because Jesus, like the Good Shepherd, gives his life for the sheep. Why is he also saying he is the door? This comes from a very simple shepherd image. If you're too poor to afford sawn wood, and some people can't afford wood in a very arid environment, you build up stones to make a sheepfold, usually dry stacked. Kind of looks like the Russian fort, except maybe a little steeper back in the Middle East. But you can't afford a door. At least not a wolf-proof door. So what happens? How do you keep the sheep in at night? You bring the sheep into the sheep pen, and then the shepherd camps out as the door. In order for anybody to get to those sheep, they have to go over the top of the shepherd. The shepherd eats supper there, and the shepherd sleeps there and guards the sheep. And that image of being the door in the wall, of being the good shepherd, is what breaks down barriers, I think. To realize that all the protection we think we have in the modern world is bogus. Have you checked your investment account for your retirement lately? Have you noticed how it goes up and it goes down and it goes up and it goes down? And back in 2009 it went down. And all of a sudden I had all sorts of minister friends who were going to retire from the ministry, and they discovered they better find a church for the next 3 to 5 years because the stock market had not kept its promise. Like the wily wolf, it said, don't worry, I'll never leave you alone. Don't worry, stocks will always go up. I am reminded of an old commercial when I went to college in the state of Kansas. It said, your Kansas banker is your friend. Now, if that isn't a wolf calling the sheep out of the fold, I don't know who is. Of course, I must admit I side with people like old Jules Sandoz out in the Sandhills of Nebraska. He was a Swiss immigrant who, by letter, got 7 bank loans he never repaid and courted 2 women he married and outlived. Of course, now the poor girl comes from Switzerland, right? He picks her up at the train stop, and there's not a tree in sight. There's not even there's one little store. And he says, get in the buckboard, honey. We're going to go over here and get married by the justice of the peace. And then he takes off and travels 45 miles to his house before they start the honeymoon. Now, she's from Switzerland. Mountains. She's out. Sandhills. What's she going to do? She got hoodwinked. Just like various folks get hoodwinked when the wolf comes circling around and says, oh, don't worry, little lambkin, I won't eat you. The good shepherd knows. And the good shepherd stands between that danger and us. Now, the sad part is, some sheep don't have sense enough to stay home. If you have a sheep barn, you have to always check the back of the sheep barn for every small hole you can find, because they're almost as bad as chickens for finding a way out. And of course, the minute they find a way out, the coyotes, the wolves, find a way in. And I don't know about you, but did you ever lose chickens to a neighbor dog? Did anybody ever break into your chicken house and get rid of all your chickens? Now, I lived in coyote country and fox country, you know. So, chickens are no smarter than sheep. Things happen to them, not just because the shepherd didn't protect them, because the shepherd will, but because sometimes the chickens and the sheep get a little mind of their own and decide to leave the safety of the flock and go experience the big bad world on their own. Now, most of us don't like to hear a comparison between Christian believers, sheep, and chickens. To be blunt, we're insulted by the comparison. And yet the reality is, it's true. Oh, I don't need to come to church, preacher. I can worship God just fine on my own. Yeah, and you know what? It's always amazing how many crazy ideas you can find to believe in if you're the only one who has to approve them. You're sitting out there on your stump and you can talk yourself into anything. One of the great functions I think about coming to church is not only do I experience the joy of being in the fellowship of my Lord Jesus Christ, I periodically have the experience of the three brothers that were in my very first church, the King brothers. And one brother had sat on the stump at home long enough, and he had figured out that he'd been going to church for 65 years. And that somewhere in that 65 years, he'd gotten a little better each year. So that at the end of 65 years, he ought to be darn near ready to proclaim himself perfect. He thought maybe another couple of years he actually would never do anything wrong again. To which his two younger brothers looked at him and said, "If you're really convinced of this, we'll send you straight there now." And this was during Sunday school. We need a church fellowship not only to worship God, but especially in our kind of questioning free church, we need a flock that says, "Are you sure you checked that with the shepherd? Are you sure that makes sense? You know, that just sounds about half nuts to me." We need people to do that. I married one, I know. She is what I call my bubble buster. I blow this big bubble of possibilities, and she comes by and goes, and we start over on a more reality-based plane. You can convince yourself of a lot of things if you don't have to deal with other people. And frankly, it's a great temptation for people in retirement. Have you noticed that sometimes people in retirement get less and less social and more convinced that they're standing on their own little patch of ground? And that one of the great things that we have as a ministry is we do really well talking to young retirees, part-time residents, and folks that want to live here and start doing new things. Well, part of that ministry is to keep them involved with other people. Part of that's why it works when we help feed the folks on Thursday. It's why it helps when we do the Kukua shop. It helps because we're stretching out of ourselves. We're being shaped by the life of the flock of Jesus Christ. We don't get to do just exactly what we want. I'm not sure that was ever a goal in Christian living. But instead of retirement being, this is where I get to fulfill all my personal desires and dreams, this is where I can continue to live for others. And this is where I continue to find that God is stretching me and growing me in new ways. And this is where I find out that the shepherd still has a lot to show me about life in the flock. How sad it would be to be a sheep without a shepherd. The woeful cry of the psalmist is, "Behold, we are like sheep without a shepherd." We have a good shepherd, not a hireling, one who has proven himself by giving his very life for the sheep. He calls us to gather in his sheepfold. He is the living door that protects us and welcomes us. He is the one who knows us, and amazingly enough, as Paul says in Romans, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Knowing everything about each one of us, Jesus still chose to go to the cross and become the good shepherd for each one. Not for a great big herd, for each one. Because when he knows us, he goes to the cross for Michael and for Gail and for each one here. Because he is the good shepherd and he knows us by name. Our hymnal, number 330 in the Brown Book, "The Lord's my shepherd,